Hey everyone, it's Nora from Nora's Ark here. It is a beautiful summer day in Wisconsin and our herb gardens are looking amazing. But as I mentioned, we're in Wisconsin here, so it does get very cold and we have harsh winters. So what we wanted to show you today is 5 of our favorite perennial herbs that we grow that come back year after year. So if you don't know what perennial means, it's as simple as that. It just means that the herbs will come back year after year with little to no effort. So today we're going to show you 5 different herbs that we love to grow here in Wisconsin that are perennials. So let's get into it. Before we get into the 5 perennial herbs that we want to show you today, we just want to mention that this raised bed that we have our herbs in, we do put a greenhouse covering over it. And it's just like a cheap greenhouse that we got on Amazon. It was about $40, so it's nothing special. But that's not necessary at all. So we have the same exact herbs in another raised bed, which we'll show you in a minute here. And we don't do anything to that raised bed, and those herbs come back just as good as these ones. So the only reason that we do that is because we want to have a longer season of harvesting these herbs. So we get to harvest them later in the fall and earlier in the spring. But as I mentioned, that's not necessary, and we have the same exact herbs in another part of our yard, and they come back the same every year without that greenhouse covering. But now that we got that out of the way, let's get into the first herb that we want to cover, and that is sage. So sage is a great herb to have in Wisconsin. You plant it once, it comes back every season, survives the harsh winters, and you can use it in a lot of different recipes. So our favorite thing to use sage for is we make an herb bread, and we use the fresh sage in there, and it tastes amazing. But you can also use it in a variety of other things in the kitchen as well. And then something else we want to mention about sage is the cool thing about sage is that when it flowers, it doesn't get bitter. So some herbs, when they do flower, they will get bitter, but with sage, it does not get bitter. And we really like to let it go to flower because the flowers are really pretty. They're pretty much spent right now, but they're a beautiful purple flower and they add a lot of color to the garden, and the bumblebees love the sage flowers. So that's the reason we like to let it go to flower. And the best part is that it doesn't get bitter when those flowers do appear. So let's get into our second herb we want to cover now. The second herb that we want to talk about today is oregano. So as you can see, this oregano is also flowering. Again, the bees love it. That's why we like to let it go to flower. But we've noticed that when oregano flowers, it does change in taste, and we think it tastes a little bitter. We've read that it doesn't necessarily get bitter when it goes to flower, but also it said it depends on the taste of the person. So we think it gets a little bit bitter once it goes to flower. So you're probably wondering why we let it do that. And the reason is, like I said, just like to have color in the garden. The bees love it. And we let all of our herbs pretty much go to flower. So then we just trim them back at the same time. And so what we'll do is we'll trim this oregano back pretty far, and then we'll get a second growth on it. And then that won't be bitter. So that's what we like to do with our oregano. And then also just cutting it back once it flowers kind of keeps it under control so it doesn't take over the entire yard. But that's oregano, and with oregano, again, we love using that in our herb bread that we make, but we also use oregano in a lot of our Italian recipes, including our homemade tomato sauce that we love to make. So love having oregano around because we can use it in a lot of recipes as well. The third herb that we want to mention is a controversial one in the gardening world, and that is mint. And the reason it's controversial is because people say that if you plant mint, it's going to take over your entire garden, take over your entire yard. The world's going to end. Everyone just hates on mint. But I'm here to tell you that you can plant mint as long as you keep it under control. So what does that mean? So with our mint, we actually harvest about 1 to 2 pounds of it a week because we sell that to the restaurant that we sell our produce and our herbs to. So that's how we keep ours under control, is we are trimming it back every week. So you just have to make sure you trim it a lot if you want to keep it under control. If you're not going to be trimming it that much, you can also put it in a pot. And we have some mint that is in a pot as well, and it comes back every year, even though it's in the pot, and we leave that pot outside. We don't bring it inside or anything like that. So you can definitely still plant it in a pot and have it be a perennial. But with mint, we like to use that for a variety of different things as well, mostly like different drinks. You can make a tea with it. You can make a mojito with it. And that's what the restaurant does that we sell to. They make mojitos, and then they also will make like a mint pesto with it as well. We haven't tried that, but it sounds pretty good. So here to tell you that mint isn't as bad as it seems, and it's another great herb to have in the garden. And since we talked about flowering with the other two herbs that we talked about, also want to talk about flowering with mint. With mint, at all costs, we like to avoid it flowering. Like I said, we're cutting it back all the time, so we don't really have that. But when we've let it flower in the past, it actually seems to attract wasps. So do not let your mint flower if you don't want that to happen. And also, I think if you let it flower, it probably would spread a lot more as well. So don't let your mint flower, but mint is a great herb to have in the garden. So before we get into the last two herbs that we want to talk about today, I just want to mention that this is the other raised bed that we have, and we have the same exact herbs in this bed, everything except mint, and we don't put a greenhouse over this one, and these herbs come back year after year, no matter what. So just wanted to mention that again, that having a greenhouse over your herbs is not a necessity for them to come back in a cold climate like Wisconsin, but we just do that to have a longer season. But as I mentioned, this is the other raised bed, and these herbs do just as well with no covering in the winter. The fourth herb that we want to talk about today is another beautiful flowering herb, and that is lavender. So lavender is a perennial in Wisconsin, but you have to be careful that you plant a variety that will survive winters. So you want to look for varieties that are English varieties. There is a few different ones. I can't remember specifically what English variety we have, but we have an English variety and it comes back year after year. We don't cover it or anything. The only thing that we do for maintenance with our lavender plant is we will prune it back in the spring, and we do it once in the middle of the summer as well. And we'll do another video that goes into pruning herbs, so that way you can learn more about that. But anyway, back to the lavender. Lavender is just so beautiful to have around. It smells so nice. We've gotten a beautiful harvest off of this plant and another plant that we have in a different portion of our yard this year. And we just love bringing it in the house and having it be a beautiful bouquet, and also having it smell really nice. But one thing is that we want to learn more about is different ways that we can use lavender, because we don't really use it that much other than selling it and then bringing it inside for a good scent. So if you have ideas of ways that you use lavender, let us know in the comments, because we'd love to utilize this herb more than we do now. The last herb that we want to mention for today's video is our thyme. So thyme is a great herb to grow, and it'll come back year after year. And that also, thyme like stays usable for a really long time in the winter. So I think that we harvest this thyme until like November, late November, depending on the weather for the year. So it's really hardy, and you can use it for a really long time in Wisconsin. And the nice thing about once it gets to like colder times of the year is the stems get a lot more sturdy, and it's a lot easier to pull the thyme leaves off of them. So that's what's nice about using it in the colder months. But another thing that's really nice about thyme is that it spreads very fast. So it's a good ground cover and really smothers out the weeds. So with our thyme, we love using that again in our herb breads and a lot of our Italian recipes like tomato sauce. But all in all, we just love having fresh herbs in the garden here in Wisconsin, because they're very low maintenance and they come back every year, and there's just so many different ways that you can use them. So we also will do another video on how to maintenance your herbs. It's not really that hard, and we'll talk about just how we cut them back in the summer and the spring and whatnot, so stay tuned for that. But Regardless, if you learned something from this video today, make sure to give it a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe to our channel so you can stay up to date on our garden.